Everyone, Pastor Nathan here. We're continuing kind of our supplemental devotion series for Back to Basics, A Firm Foundation. This is our Sunday morning series where we're hitting the highlights of God's salvation history as we're going through the Old Testament and eventually the New Testament to see how God is working in the world and how He is working to save people from their sin. So this last Sunday we talked about the flood, and this next Sunday we're going to talk about the call of Abram. In between, though, in Genesis, we get Genesis chapter 11, where we see this episode, the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel is interesting in that it shows how humanity didn't kind of learn much from the pre-flood judgment of God, but it also shows kind of how God continues to be consistent in how He works and acts in the world. If you were to read Genesis 11, 1 and following, you would see a couple things are happening here. The first is that humanity, like I said, is still humanity. They want to consolidate power. They said, let's not get scattered around the earth, which, by the way, was in direct violation of what God had commanded people to do in the first place, which was to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. They're saying, no, let's not fill the earth. Let's kind of stay right here. The second thing they do is they try to construct a tower to heaven. In order to ostensibly reach God and be like God once again. So they're still following in the broken image of their father Adam through Noah down to them. And in some ways, I think this shows, among other things, that they were still more concerned about reaching heaven, about being gods, than they were about tending the earth and going about the things in front of them to do, which is to obey God. Fast forward several millennia to the 21st century, and are we that much different? No. Well, I mean, we live in a world that tries to shore up power. And by the way, God's people are not immune to this, where we gather in our huddles and groups to make sure we can consolidate votes or opinions. But that's another devotion. But the second thing, we also live in a world where if people believe there is a heaven, they are more likely to believe that entrance into heaven is going to be based on a tower of their own efforts, rather than, that those works will be what admit them to heaven. If the balance of our good deeds just edges out our evil ones, 50.1 to 49.9% will make it. I mean, the thing is, for God's people, we do this too when it comes to our salvation. We may be tempted to think that our deeds will justify us before God. I don't know how many times, several at least, where I have had the privilege of walking with folks, but I'll hear them say something along the lines of, I'm not sure I've done enough to make it to heaven, Pastor. Even as followers of Jesus Christ, regenerated folks, it is tempting to believe that our entrance into heaven is going to be based upon what we have done or not done, or will be denied by what we have done or failed to do. Fortunately, what we see in this section, Genesis chapter 11, is that God is still God. The same God who acted in justice and mercy towards Adam and Eve, who acted in justice and mercy towards an unbelieving world and towards Noah, is a God who still acts like that in the Tower of Babel and today. You see, in Genesis, in this section, Genesis 11, God comes down to humanity in order to rescue humanity by breaking them up. He says, let's go down and kind of confuse the languages. It breaks them up. This is His justice. He's saying, look, they're not doing what I called them to do or told them to do. I'm going to, put an impediment and a barrier in place so that they are forced to go and do what I commanded them to do, which is to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. So this also gets them to do what God told humanity to do, but keeps them from consolidating power, and then places a cap on their ability to achieve. That pushes humanity away from self-reliance, at least says, you can't be completely reliant on yourself, and puts back towards relying on God. That's His mercy. He's saying, look, I'm going to push you back towards me. For us in the 21st century, especially as followers of Jesus Christ, God comes down again. We remember this in the book of Matthew, the first century. He comes down as Jesus Christ, being merciful in that He rescues us from sin, but also shows His justice by placing all that sin on Jesus Christ, on Himself, and then dying at a cross. You see, our God is still God. Our God still acts in mercy and in justice, just as He did in the Old Testament, so also He continues to act out of His character in the New Testament and even today. And that's huge for us. Because where we find ourselves sinning, where we find ourselves breaking God's command, refusing to do what God wants us to do, He comes to us in His Word. He comes to us in the people around us. And He says, come back to me. Come follow me. There's forgiveness. There is grace. But then there is also, here's what I have for you to do. Do this thing that I've left you on earth here to do, to love me and to love your neighbor as yourself. God's mercy and His justice still at work today, even in our lives. And we are so thankful to our God for this. Anyhow, I hope that's helpful for you, and we'll talk again soon. Take care.